have to thank my wife, Lena, my husband, Mark, smiled at the podium, his voice booming across the grand ballroom of the St. Pointless Libre. Regis. She keeps the house clean and reminds me that some people are just meant for theory. The crowd of investors and pharma executives chuckled. He then turned, placing a proprietary hand on the shoulder of the woman beside him. Dr. Eva Reed. Eva, he announced, is the one who gets things done. This was the public anointment. This was the execution. This was his scheme to publicly discard me. His wife, the PhD biochemist, he called a useless academic, and simultaneously anoint his mistress as the new genius of his billion-dollar company. He was praising her for Evandra, their new fast-track drug initiative, a project he had stolen. He expected me to collapse, to cry, to flee the room in utter humiliation, confirming my status as a worthless, emotional housewife. I did not cry. My expression remained perfectly neutral. My focus sharp. I wasn't a wife hearing an insult. I was a scientist observing a catastrophic, fatal error. Mark, in his blinding arrogance, had no idea that I, Lena, was also Prometheus, the anonymous creator of the Prometheus's simulation algorithm, and he had no idea that his breakthrough drug, Evandra, was the same compound, FR22, that my own algorithm had already flagged as 98% toxic. This was not my execution. It was the trigger for his pranas. If you want to see how the useless theorist, use his own blind arrogance to dismantle his billion-dollar empire. Like this video and subscribe. The clinical trial is about to begin. Mark continued his speech, his voice dripping with false modesty. But my mind was already cataloging the betrayals. His public insult about my theory was the deepest cut. I remembered the day I gave up my tenure-track position at MIT. I sacrificed my entire academic career. My dream. To follow him when he had nothing but a risky idea. He had begged me then. Called me his secret weapon. His genius partner. He said his practical skill and my visionary theory would be unstoppable. I was the one who wrote the initial business plan. I was the one who drafted the core scientific proposals that secured his first-round venture capital. He was now standing on the stage of the company I helped build, praising a mistress who arrived long after the hard work was done. He was dismissing the very theoretical science that had been the foundation of his success. He wanted to see me as a theorist. He would soon learn that theory, when proven, becomes law. He was now praising Evandra, the drug he and Eva were fast-tracking. I thought of the 3 sleepless months I had spent running that exact compound. For 22, through my Proteus simulation, I had postponed my own physical therapy for a chronic back issue, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, just to get Mark the data he requested. I presented my findings to him in a sealed report. It was a 98% toxicity warning. I remembered his face. On the look of concern as he thanked me, he said, "This is why you're my conscience. Lena, thank God you caught this. We'll shelve it." He never shelved it. He lied. He took my confidential, health-sacrificing do not use data and gave it directly to Eva. They repackaged it as a breakthrough. He was using my meticulous work not as a warning, but as a roadmap for his fraud, all while publicly humiliating me for that same work. He believes the data is just numbers on a screen. He will learn that those numbers represent real lives, and I will hold him accountable for his greed. My gaze shifted to Eva Reed. She stood there, smirking, accepting the applause meant for my work. I remembered welcoming her into our lives. Mark claimed she was a brilliant but struggling scientist. I believed him. I, believing in supporting other women in STEM, personally mentored her. I reviewed her flawed papers. I offered her connections. I even hosted her at our home for 2 weeks when she was between apartments. She had called me her hero, her role model. She had cried in my kitchen, thanking me for my kindness. Eva was not a struggling scientist. She was a predator. She had used my mentorship to map my weaknesses and used my kindness as a stepping stone to my husband's bed. The flawed papers were a test of my ego. The tears were a manipulation. Eva thinks she has finally gotten things done. She will soon discover that the only thing she has accomplished is making herself a primary accessory to a multi-billion-dollar corporate fraud. Mark was winding down his speech, basking in the applause. The applause was for an illusion. 3 years ago, this company was on the verge of collapse after a different drug trial failed. Mark was in a state of sheer panic. I, without his knowledge, used my private family inheritance money. Mark believed I did not have to anonymously buy up a massive block of the company's toxic debt through a shell corporation. I stabilized the company. I saved him from ruin. He never questioned the miracle investor who saved him. He simply boasted to his friends that his gut instinct was better than everyone else's. He claimed he had willed the company to succeed. He was now standing on a stage, in a gala funded by the very financial stability I had secretly provided, calling me a useless parasite. His entire empire was built on the foundation of my useless PhD and my useless inheritance. He never saw me as a scientist. He never saw me as his silent partner. He certainly never saw me as his largest. Anonymous creditor. Mark finished his speech and raised his glass, looking directly at me, his eyes demanding my submission. He expected tears. He expected shame. I simply lifted my champagne glass in a slow, deliberate, mock toast. My eyes met his, and I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not look away. I simply observed. He saw it. His bravado evaporated. The victorious smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. And then, a spark of genuine fear. He, who expected tears, was now looking at the cold, analytical contempt of a superior. The investors near the stage saw him stumble. He cleared his throat, suddenly desperate to move on, and rushed through his closing remarks. His perfect night, his perfect victory, was suddenly hollow. He was infuriated by my defiance, by my refusal to be broken. He would have to break me. He just did not know that he was the one who was already broken. Mark stormed into my home office the next morning, his face a mask of cold fury. He was still furious about the gala. Furious that my calm observation had stolen his moment of triumph. He kicked a stack of biochemistry journals near the door. "What is all this junk?" "Lena," he snapped, gesturing to the room. "I am trying to run a billion-dollar company, and my house looks like a failing college library. This is a fire hazard. It's clutter. This room was my sanctuary. It was the only space in the house that was truly mine. I had spent 2 months and thousands of dollars from my own private funds, which he knew nothing about, to turn it into a lab. I had installed soundproofing, dedicated power lines, and a high-capacity cooling system, all hidden behind false walls and decoy bookshelves. The clutter he was kicking was the facade. The clutter was the physical manifestation of his blind arrogance. The humming he dismissed as a waste of electricity was the sound of the Prometheus's algorithm, the sound of the hidden servers that held the real value of his entire company. He saw a room full of dusty textbooks and old research papers. He did not see the data center hidden behind a copy of Gray's Anatomy. He saw a waste, not the engine of his salvation. "I am tired of this. Lena," he said, his voice dropping. "I am tired of you hiding in here with your theories, contributing nothing." I remembered the countless nights I had spent in this very room, saving him. I remembered the AG-44 compound 2 years ago. He had bet the company's entire fourth quarter on it. I ran the simulation. I found the flaw, the one he and his team had missed that would have triggered renal failure. I didn't tell him the algorithm found it. I, the useless theorist, had gently suggested he recheck a specific amino acid sequence. He found the flaw himself and called himself a genius at the next board meeting. He was now standing in the very room where I had saved his company. calling my work nothing. He would learn that his entire career was built on the nothing I had contributed. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes cold and assessing. He was moving on to his next attack. "You are going to make yourself useful," Ed declared, "this Friday. You are going to host a dinner party. An intimate dinner party. Just for the executive team and our star scientist." He meant Eva Reed. The command was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. It was not enough to publicly humiliate me at the gala. It was not enough to anoint his mistress as the new genius. He now needed me to serve her. He wanted me, the wife, to cook a meal for the woman replacing me in my own home. "Eva will be here," he continued, enjoying the moment. "She is going to be consulting on the Evandra project more closely. I want you to show her support." Support. He wanted me to support my own replacement. I thought of my parents, how I had lied to them for years about my marriage. I told them Mark was supportive of my sabbatical from research. I had sacrificed my reputation in the academic world, the world I loved, to protect his fragile ego. I had endured the pitying looks from old colleagues, the questions about why a mind like mine was going to waste. I had sacrificed my dignity to be his supportive wife. Now, he was demanding I use that same support to welcome his mistress into my home, to validate his affair. He was using the very sacrifice I had made for him as the weapon to destroy me. "You should be grateful for this, Lena," he said, misinterpreting my silence as weakness. "You should talk to Eva. You could learn a thing or two. See how real applied science works. Instead of just this." He waved his hand at my office again. "At the Prometheus's servers." I thought about the massive electricity bills for this room. The bills I paid every month from my secret inheritance account. Prometheus's required more power than the rest of the house combined. Mark, who only saw the top-line summary of the household expenses, would often complain, "What are you running in that office?" "Lena, a tanning salon. This bill is insane. If you don't start pulling your weight, I'm just going to cut the power to that hobby room." He had no idea. He was complaining about the cost of the very tool that had saved him from bankruptcy. A tool I was paying for. All while he called me the financial burden. He was threatening to unplug his own life support. His arrogance was so profound. It had become a structural liability. He saw me as a relic. He saw me as a quiet, academic burden he had to drag along. He saw Eva as the future. He needed to prove to his investors, and to himself, that she was the replacement. He needed me to bow down, to accept my obsolescence, to serve the filet mignon. He expected me to protest. He wanted me to yell, to cry, to call him a bastard. He wanted me to be jealous and unsupportive. That would have been his victory. It would have proven that I was just the emotional, hysterical housewife he described at the gala. I looked up from my desk, my gaze calm and steady. "Of course, Mark," I said, my voice polite and even. "I would be happy to host Dr. Reed. What time on Friday?" He froze. This was not the reaction he wanted. He had swung a sledgehammer, expecting me to shatter. But I had simply stepped aside. My polite compliance, my instant agreement, threw him completely off balance. His attack had no impact. His momentum was gone. He, the master of the universe, suddenly looked foolish, like a man who had declared war on someone who was not even paying attention. 8 o'clock, he stammered, trying to regain his footing. Good. See that you clean this place up first." He turned and left the office, slamming the door behind him. He thought he had won, that he had successfully asserted his dominance. He had no idea what he had just done. He had just invited the enemy, drunk on her own arrogance, directly into my sanctuary. He had invited Eva Reed, the applied scientist, into the room that held the one secret that could destroy them both. He thought he was forcing me to serve his mistress. In reality, he had just set the table for her downfall. The dinner party was an exercise in calculated humiliation. I prepared the meal myself. I spent 2 days making a bœuf bourguignon that required a level of technical precision, the searing, the temperature control, the reduction of the sauce that was far more complex than the applied science Eva Reed championed. Mark. Of course. I loved it. He tasted the sauce and laughed, holding his wine glass up. He told the other executives that this was my true calling. He said my cooking was world-class. He was praising me for the one skill he considered non-threatening. He was celebrating my domesticity. I thought of my PhD dissertation, the one he once called unreadable. I had sacrificed my reputation, me dignity, and my professional standing for this man. He was now using my domestic skill as the stage for my final replacement, forcing me to cater the event that celebrated my own obsolescence. He thinks my value lies in a recipe. I will remind him that my real value lies in the formulas he can neither understand nor control. Eva Reed arrived last. She was wearing a crimson silk dress, cut aggressively low. It was a dress I recognized, not the dress itself, but the style, the expense. It was from a boutique Mark used to take me to, back when he was still trying to mold me, to sand off my academic edges. He had clearly moved on to molding his new project. Eva swept into the dining room, not as a guest, but as the new lady of the manor. I remembered the day I had personally recommended Eva for an adjunct research grant. I had spent 6 hours of my own time I could have spent on my Prometheus's algorithm, editing her sloppy proposal. I had defended her work to the grant committee. I had sacrificed my own valuable research time to lift her up, believing I was helping another woman in a field dominated by men. She had thanked me, her eyes full of tears, calling me her inspiration. She was now using the career I had helped her secure to sleep with my husband and destroy my life. She thinks she is a predator. I see her only as a parasite, and I am about to cut off her host. During the main course, Eva began her performance. She accidentally excused herself from the table. I knew exactly where she was going. Mark's eyes followed her, a smug smile on his face. This was planned. A minute later, I remembered I needed to check on the dessert. I followed her. I found her exactly where I knew she would be in my office, which I had intentionally left unlocked. She was standing in front of the decoy bookshelves, the ones holding the physical copies of my research. These were my old notebooks. The honeypot. They were filled with years of my life. They were filled with the dead-end equations, the flawed models, the agonizing process of failure that had led to the Prometheus's breakthrough. They looked like the ramblings of a failed theorist. Eva had one of the notebooks open in her hand. She looked up, feigning a lost expression. "Oh, Lena, I am so sorry. I just got turned around. And, well, I was just so curious about your work." "Please," I said, my voice flat. "Help yourself." Her face lit up with a predatory gleam. This was the moment she had been waiting for. This was the intellectual execution. She ran her finger down a page of complex equations, the foundational math that I knew was flawed. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice dripping with the most patronizing pity I had ever heard. "I see what you were trying to do here. You were trying to solve the Valenti sequence. You were so close." She then proceeded to explain my own work back to me. Incorrectly. She scoffed. "You academics," she said. "You always get stuck in the weeds. You just did not know how to apply it." Mark was standing in the doorway, watching. He was smirking. He expected me to argue. He expected me to be defensive, to be humiliated, to be intellectually crushed by the applied genius of his mistress. I looked at the flawed equation she was pointing at. I feigned ignorance. "Oh, really?" I asked. my voice intentionally small. Is that how it works? I always get stuck on the theory. Eva's smile widened. This was her victory. She had proven her superiority. Do not worry. Honey, she said, patting my arm. I can fix this. And then she did exactly what I had prepared for. She took out her phone. This is actually quite interesting, she said, trying to sound casual. You would not mind if I borrowed this for reference. She did not wait for an answer. She began to take photographs, page after page, of the flawed data. She was documenting her own crime. She, the applied scientist, was literally stealing poison. She was stealing the toxic, dead-end data that I had abandoned 3 years ago. She thought she was stealing a secret. She was actually stealing a time bomb. I remembered the agony those notebooks represented. I remembered the nights I had spent, my back aching, my vision blurry, pouring my life into those dead ends. I had sacrificed my health, my sleep, and my sanity, all for those failures. Eva was now looking at the physical evidence of my sacrifice and calling it flawed because she was too stupid to understand it was a foundation. She was a thief, too arrogant to even know what she was stealing. Please, I said, gesturing to the shelf. Take all the notes you need. Eva. She finished, her phone full of useless, toxic, and now stolen data. She tucked it away. Thank you, Lena, she said, and her voice smug. I think I can actually use this. She walked out of the office, brushing past Mark. He looked at me, his eyes full of pity and contempt. See, Lena, he whispered, so the others would not hear. That is what I am talking about. A real scientist solves problems. They do not just collect them. He was praising his mistress for stealing my flawed data, all while he was ignoring my correct data that showed Evandra was a catastrophe. He was celebrating a thief for stealing garbage, believing it was gold. I watched them walk back to the dining table. Triumphant. Eva was excited. That excitement would be infectious. She would now convince Mark that this flawed research was a diamond in the rough, and that would lead Mark to his next fatal mistake. He would now believe that all of my useless work was valuable. He would soon come for the rest. Mark did not wait. He arrived the next morning. Not with the cold fury of the day before, but with a new, predatory energy. Eva's discovery at the dinner party had convinced him. He strode into my office, his eyes scanning the room. Not for clutter to mock, but for assets to seize. Eva was impressed, he said, skipping any pleasantries. His gaze bypassed the notebooks on the shelf that was yesterday's news. He zeroed in on my desk, on the external hard drives plugged into my workstation. She said your theoretical work was extensive. What is on these? Lena. He was pointing at my decoys. They were the digital equivalent of the notebooks Eva had photographed. You have been hiding this, he said. His voice was not angry. It was the cold, flat tone of an accusation. You, the little academic, as have been hoarding company IP. You have been sitting on research that belongs to me. I remembered when I had first designed the Prometheus's algorithm. I had built it with the strictest, most rigorous ethical framework imaginable. I had spent an entire year, a year I could have been publishing, designing the algorithm's conscience. It was a system built specifically to prevent the kind of catastrophic, rush-to-market failures that he and Eva were now championing. My work was the pinnacle of ethical science. I had sacrificed speed for safety, a concept he had always mocked as academic weakness. This work is flawed, Lena, he sneered, his gaslighting in full effect. Eva showed me. It is dangerously incomplete. It is unethical for you to have just sat on this, letting the company struggle. He The man who was actively lying to his investors. The man who was pushing a toxic drug toward the public. Was using the word unethical to describe my work. He was using my own integrity as a weapon against me. All so he could justify stealing the decoy data to support his truly unethical drug. He wants to lecture me on ethics. I will give him a masterclass in consequences. He moved to the desk and placed his hand on the stack of 3 hard drives. As CEO of this company, and as your husband, I am confiscating this. All of it. He began to unplug the drives. One by one. We need to review this properly. We need to protect you from yourself. We need to protect the company from your mistakes. This was the moment. He expected me to freeze. To be the useless theorist. Too weak to fight for my own work. He expected me to be cowed by his authority. I did not disappoint him. I let out a sharp, panicked gasp. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. No, I said, my voice intentionally breaking. No. Mark. Please. I had spent an entire week meticulously curating those decoy drives. I had filled them with 2 terabytes of corrupted data files, partially completed simulations, and old, abandoned algorithms. It was the digital equivalent of the honeypot notebooks. I had sacrificed my own time I should have spent running real simulations just to build this perfect, glittering trap for his supreme arrogance. Please. Mark. You cannot. I cried, and I forced the tears to come. It was not difficult. I simply thought of the man I used to love. The man who was now standing in front of me. Robbing me. That is my private research. It is not ready. It is not finished. His eyes lit up. My panic was the confirmation he needed. He knew it. This was the real treasure. He was standing 3 feet away from the false wall that concealed the real server rack. He was 3 feet away from the $60,000 custom-built, Swiss-secured Cadmus data center that housed the multi-billion-dollar Prometheus algorithm, but he could not see it. His arrogance was a physical blindfold. He was so focused on the weak woman me crying over the obvious prize, the drives, that he was completely blind to the actual fortress right in front of him. He thinks he is a predator stealing a prize. He is just a rat, taking the cheese I had laid out for him. He gathered the 3 hard drives, stacking them neatly. His smirk was back, triumphant and patronizing. I am sorry, Lena, but this is for the good of the company. It is in better hands now. He was walking away with $200 worth of off-the-shelf hard drives. Believing he had just stolen my life's work, he was confiscating the decoys while the real asset, the $60,000 server array, hummed silently and safely behind the wall. He was so blinded by his own genius that he had mistaken an empty box for the treasure. My work, I whispered, letting my voice trail off, playing the role of the defeated woman to the very end. He left. He did not look back. He closed the door firmly, the sound of the latch clicking shut. I waited. 1 beat, 2 beats. The tears stopped instantly. I wiped my face, my expression hardening into cold, analytical calm. I walked to my desk. I reached into a hidden drawer beneath the keyboard and pulled out a new decoy hard drive, plugging it into the empty slot. He thought he was taking my work. He was just taking out the trash. Now they had it all. Mark and Eva. They had the flawed notebooks from the dinner party. And now they had the corrupted hard drives from my desk. They had everything they needed to fix my failed research. They would be arrogant. They would be fast. And they would build their entire breakthrough drug on a foundation of poison. Let them. Mark made his final move a week later. I was in the living room, reading a biochemistry quarterly. When he returned from work, he did not say hello. He walked straight to the coffee table and threw down 2 documents. The first was a thick stack of legal papers, bound in blue. The second was a glossy, embossed press release. I am divorcing you, Lena. he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. It is over. He tapped the press release. And this, he said, his voice swelling with pride, is the future. I looked at the headline. Evandra, Mark Vance, and Dr. Eva Reed announce revolutionary fast-track cure. This was it. The ultimate. Synthesized betrayal. He was ending our marriage and launching the stolen, toxic drug on the same day. He was cutting me out of his life personally and replacing me professionally. All in one clean, brutal motion. I am being generous, he sneered, gesturing to the divorce papers. I am not coming after you for wasting company resources all these years on your little hobby. He said the house was being sold. That my name was on nothing. Since you are just a housewife with no income, you will get nothing. You should have thought of that before you stopped contributing. Nain come. I thought of the $80,000 from my own inheritance that I had used to quietly pay off his staggering student loan debt. Years ago, when we had nothing, I had done it so he could breathe, so he could focus on his dream. He had wept with gratitude. He had called me his savior. He was now standing in the house I had secured the mortgage for, using the financial freedom I had given him to declare me a financial zero. He was using the stability I provided to throw me out. He thinks income is the only measure of worth. He is about to learn the true, staggering price of intellectual property. And as for your research, he continued, his voice dripping with contempt, my lawyers have determined that since I funded your hobby, all of those little drives and notebooks are officially corporate property. It all belongs to me now. He was claiming my life's work. I remembered the night. 5 years ago, when he was the one being sued, a competitor claimed he had stolen a chemical process. He was hysterical, convinced he was going to jail. I, the useless academic, stayed up for 72 hours. I read every patent file. I found the one obscure legal precedent that proved his work was original. I wrote the legal brief his own high-priced lawyers used to win the case. He had called me his partner in everything then. He was now using the very concept of corporate property to steal my work, forgetting that the only reason he had a corporation left to steal with was because my useless research had saved it. He was using the legal armor I had built for him as a weapon against me. I looked at the press release again. Evandra. It was FR22, the drug I had run through the Prometheus' simulation, the drug I had warned him about, the drug that my report, the report I had sacrificed my own physical health to complete, had flagged with a 98% toxicity warning. His breakthrough was a time bomb. I remembered his words when I gave him that report. Thank God you caught this. Lena, we'll shelve it. It was not just a lie. It was sociopathic. He had taken my ethical warning, the product of my sacrifice, and used it as a roadmap for his fraud. He was knowingly, consciously, pushing a drug I had proven was poison onto the public. This was no longer about a marriage. This was no longer about IP theft. This was about public safety. He has just confirmed he is a danger to everyone. He thinks he is a CEO. I now see him as a liability that must be contained. The press release was filled with glowing quotes about his mistress. Dr. Reed's brilliant applied science. Dr. Reed's innovative modeling. The genius of Dr. Eva Reed. I thought of the dozens of papers I had published in my academic career. Before I met Mark, I thought of the tenure track I had given up. I had chosen anonymity. I had poured my genius into his shadow, allowing him to take the credit for the wins I had engineered. Because he needed the spotlight, I had sacrificed my own reputation to build his pursuits. He was now taking the credit I had voluntarily given him and handing it to his mistress. He was using the anonymity I had chosen to support him as proof that I had never contributed anything at all. He thinks recognition is something he has the power to grant. I will show him what happens when my real name, Prometheus, enters the conversation. He was watching me. Waiting. He expected the dam to break. He was waiting for the screaming, the begging, the shock, the collapse. He had just taken my home, my perceived work, my marriage, and my future. He expected me to be a shattered, penniless, useless housewife. Well, he demanded, his voice impatient. Nothing to say. My hand was perfectly steady. I did not look at the divorce papers. I looked only at the press release. I picked up a pen from the coffee table. I calmly, slowly, drew a neat, precise circle around one phrase. The phrase was based on a revolutionary new predictive model. He had done it. He had, in a legally binding public document, admitted to using a predictive model to justify his toxic drug. He thought he was announcing his victory. He was actually signing his confession. He was publicly linking his breakthrough to the very Usfelis decoy data he had stolen from my office. I pushed the press release back toward him. I smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was not a broken smile. It was the smile of profound, analytical satisfaction. Thank you, Mark, I said. His face, so full of triumph, crumpled. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a sudden, charring confusion. What did you say? Thank you, I repeated. Standing up, I was no longer his wife. I was Prometheus. And he had just given me cause. I will have my things packed by morning. He was speechless. He was still processing. He thought he was ending my life. He had no idea that he had just handed me the scalpel. He had given me the public admission of intellectual property theft. He had given me the motive, the Avandra time bomb, to use it. And, best of all, he had given me my freedom. The marriage was over. The game, however, had just begun. I moved out of the house that same day. I left with one suitcase, my personal laptop, and the clothes I was wearing. I did not take the furniture, the car, or the art. I left it all. Mark was, as he put it, generous. He had a check for $5,000 a final. Insulting severance sent to my parents' address. He assumed he had gone running home. A penniless, defeated housewife. To cry on my childhood bed. He expected me to be shattered. He was wrong. I did not go to my parents. I checked into a sterile, anonymous, extended stay hotel suite in the financial district. My first move was not to hire a divorce attorney or to fight for alimony. My first move was to execute the ghost protocol. I used a burner phone, one I had kept hidden for 2 years, to call a single number in Switzerland. This call activated the Cadmus Group. I had established the Cadmus Group 5 years ago, using the last of my private inheritance, the money Mark believed I did not have. I had sacrificed my own short-term financial security, locking up hundreds of thousands of dollars, to build this invisible legal fortress. It was an anonymous, ultra-secure legal and data hosting firm. It was my ark. Mark had always mocked my paranoia about data security. He would laugh and say that no one wanted to steal my useless theories and that I was not that important. He was mocking my obsession with security while he was I knew, carelessly leaving his own company's financials exposed on shared drives. He was calling me unimportant while I was building the very legal structure that would one day own him. He believes important means being loud, being on a stage. He will learn that true power is the silent, secure, and invisible fortress he never bothered to build. The call activated my Prometheus identity. I instructed my Cadmus lawyers to prepare a new holding company, Proteus Dynamics. I told them to be ready. Then, I began the real attack. I opened my laptop. I connected to the secure Proteus's mainframe via my private, encrypted terminal. The servers, hidden behind the wall in my old office, were still mine. I initiated the final complete, and definitive simulation. I attacked my own algorithm. I ran the Avandra compound Mark's toxic FR22 through the complete Proteus's model. Mark was celebrating. I saw the pictures. His social media was suddenly active. He and Eva were in Cabo. On a yacht. Drinking champagne. He was celebrating his new life. His divorce. His new drug. And his new genius. Avon sent me a single text message. A photo of the sunset. The caption read, "Hope you are enjoying your parents' couch. You made your choice." He was sipping champagne. I was watching the data flow. He, the applied scientist, had won. He expected me to be defeated. Broken. Living in my childhood bedroom. Crying over my failure. He did not know I was in a hotel suite. In a command center. Running the simulation that would end him. The simulation finished after 48 hours. The result was not just toxic. It was a catastrophic cascade failure. I remembered the first simulation. The one I had run while I had pneumonia. The one I had sacrificed my own health to complete. I had given him the warning. The 98% toxicity flag. He had looked at my warning and said, "Thank God you caught this. Lena, we'll shelve it." He had lied. He had taken my warning and given it to Eva. They had used the flawed decoy data I had planted the notebooks, the hard drives, and, in their supreme arrogance, believed they were fixing my mistakes. Their fix had not removed the toxicity. It had magnified it. The Prometheus's algorithm, in its final, horrifying clarity, showed that Avandra did not just cause liver toxicity. It triggered a protein misfolding cascade that led to neurological damage and, in 12% of the simulations, fatal heart arrhythmia. Their genius had not created a cure. They had created a weapon. They had turned my warning into a bomb. I finalized the data packet. It was a complete, irrefutable, multi-billion-dollar death warrant for their breakthrough drug. I encrypted the file. I sent it to my Cadmus lawyers in Switzerland. With one simple instruction: prepare the final injunctions and the letter to the FDA. Wait for my signal. Mark was still in Cabo, posting photographs of his new life. He was basking in the glow of his victory. He had no idea that back in New York, his worthless housewife had just finalized the weapon that would vaporize his entire company. My silence was not weakness. It was the calm, precise, methodical countdown of a general preparing for a siege. My silence was a vacuum. Mark and Eva returned from Cabo. Not to a wife begging for alimony or a scientist fighting for credit, but to a void. I had vanished. My lawyer had filed a simple, no contest response to the divorce, accepting the insulting $5,000 severance. This, I knew, was more terrifying to Mark than any fight. A screaming, hysterical victim is predictable. A defeated enemy begs for scraps. A dangerous enemy is silent. His narcissism could not stand the vacuum. He could not stand that I was not performing the role of the defeated housewife. He needed to control the narrative, to prove to the world, and to himself, that he had won. So he launched the attack. It was not a quiet, personal attack like the dinner party. It was a media blitzkrieg. The Avandra Roadshow was suddenly everywhere. Mark and Eva were the new darlings of the financial news circuit. They were on Mad Money, their faces beaming from the screen. They were profiled in Forbes under the headline, "The Power Couple Curing the Future." They were on Bloomberg Tech, giving a keynote interview. I watched the Bloomberg interview from my sterile hotel suite. Mark looked polished, visionary, and completely confident. I remembered how he used to be. I remembered when we were first seeking venture capital for his risky idea. He was terrified of public speaking. He would break out in a cold sweat. I was the one who coached him. I had spent months, time I could have spent on my own dissertation, teaching him how to breathe, how to stand, how to own the room. I wrote his first ever pitch deck. I wrote the cue cards he used. He had called me his secret weapon, his rock, the brain that gave him the voice. He was now using the exact persona I had built, the confidence I had taught him, to go on international television and sell a catastrophic lie. He was using the voice I had given him to publicly destroy the integrity I had represented. He thinks his voice is his greatest asset. I will make it his primary liability. Ava Reed sat beside him, the star scientist. She was the new face of the company's genius. The anchor turned to her, asking about the science. I thought of my useless theory. I thought of the academic reputation I had sacrificed. I had given up tenure. I had given up my name in the scientific community. The only thing I had ever valued. I chose obscurity to make him comfortable, to protect his fragile ego from my intimidating PhD. He had gaslit me into believing my anonymity was a noble choice for the company, that we were a team. Now, he could not stand the void left by my useless presence. He had to appoint a new genius. He was putting Eva, a mediocre, opportunistic researcher, onto the pedestal I had voluntarily vacated. He was praising her applied science, which was a direct, public attack on the theoretical work I had been doing in secret all along. He thinks he can replace a theorist like changing a battery. He will soon learn the difference between a filament and the power station. The anchor asked Eva a technical question. Dr. Reed. The anchor said, the Valenti sequence has been a known barrier for this kind of drug. How did you solve it? Eva smiled, a mask of polite sympathy. We found that the company's early models, she said, were flawed. The previous researcher she meant me was trying to solve the Valenti sequence, but simply could not apply it. She was stuck in the weeds. I remembered the Valenti sequence. It was the exact flawed equation I had left in the decoy notebooks. The equation I had left for her to steal at the dinner party. I had spent 18 months of my life, 2 agonizing winters, proving that that specific sequence was a toxic dead end. My sacrifice was the time, the mental anguish, the proof that this path was poison. Eva continued, her voice full of confidence. What we did, she said, was fix the application. We solved the theoretical flaw. Evandra successfully binds to the protein without the toxic overload. She was lying. She had not fixed it. She couldn't fix it. The data was fundamentally, fatally toxic. She was now on international television, bragging about the scientific integrity of the very honeypot data I had left for her. She was claiming my trap was her breakthrough. She thinks she is a genius. She is just a parrot, repeating the nonsense I fed her, and she is doing it for a global, time-stamped audience. The anchor was impressed. He turned back to Mark. And the financials. Mark, the stock is soaring on this hype. Can you deliver? Mark leaned in. The picture of a visionary CEO. This is not hype, he said, his voice firm. This is a guaranteed 9-figure revenue stream within 2 quarters. We are fast-tracking this. The data is 100% conclusive. This is a miracle. 100% conclusive. I remembered the real report, the one I had given him, the one I had sacrificed my own health to complete, the one that proved, conclusively, that FR22 was a catastrophe. I remembered his exact words. Thank God you caught this. Lena, we'll shelve it. He was now on live television, telling the world the data was 100% conclusive in the opposite direction. He was not just lying to the public. He was not just lying about the science. He was committing massive, blatant securities fraud. I calmly picked up my phone. I recorded the last 2 minutes of the broadcast. Mark and Eva thought they were cementing their victory. They thought they were building an insurmountable wall of media hype. A wall that would make their drug too big to fail by the time any problems arose. They were wrong. They were not building a wall. They were creating a time-stamped, irrefutable, public record of their lies. They were cataloging their own fraud for my legal team. I did not need to respond. I did not need to issue a statement. I simply forwarded the video clip of the Bloomberg interview to my Cadmus lawyers in Switzerland. The hype was building. The stock was soaring. Mark and Eva were untouchable. They had successfully controlled the narrative. This was the reactive escalation. This media blitz. This wall of public lies was the exact reason I now had to act. I could no longer wait for the FDA. I could no longer be Lena. I had to puncture that hype now. It was time to introduce the world to Prometheus. Mark and Eva's media blitz was an impenetrable wall of hype. The stock was soaring. The FDA fast track seemed inevitable. They were untouchable. They had forgotten about me. But they were not fighting me. Lena Vance, the useless housewife. They were fighting Prometheus. The identity I had spent a decade building. I had created the Prometheus identity at MIT. Long before I met Mark. It was my anonymous academic handle. I used it to publish the theoretical work that was too radical for peer review. Prometheus's was a legend in the small, elite world of quantitative biology. Prometheus's was pure, uncorrupted science. I had sacrificed fame, money, and recognition to keep that identity secret. To keep it clean. I had sacrificed my own ambition for the integrity of the work. Mark, of course, had mocked this when I, in a moment of weakness, told him I published anonymously. He had laughed. He told me it was cowardly. He said, "If you are so smart, why are you hiding?" Lena, real players put their names on things. Only failures and cowards stay anonymous. He was now forcing me to use my symbol of pure integrity as a weapon in his dirty, commercial war. He was sullying the one thing I had kept sacred. He thinks anonymity is weakness. I will show him it is the perfect shield from which to launch the perfect attack. I prepared the leak. I did not need to send the whole Prometheus's simulation. That would be messy. I just needed one. Precise cut. I isolated the Evandra compound's catastrophic effect on liver proteins. I drafted 2 emails. The first email was to the editor of The Lancet. My entire academic life. I had dreamed of being published in The Lancet. It was the pinnacle. I had sacrificed that dream when I left my tenure track to support Mark's practical vision. I remembered finding one of my old, rejected submissions when we moved in together. He had found me crying. He held me and told me, "You do not need their approval. Lena, you have my approval." He had used my vulnerability to make himself the new pinnacle of my ambition. Now, I was finally contacting The Lancet, but I was not sending it as Dr. Wani, Lena Vance, the brilliant theorist. I was sending it as an anonymous, cowardly whistleblower, leaking data against my own husband's company. He had taken my dream and turned it into a weapon of revenge. He thinks he replaced my ambition. He was wrong. The second email was to a man named Julian Thorne. Thorne was the one financial analyst Mark had failed to charm. He was a ruthless, data-driven skeptic whom Mark despised. I remembered Mark returning from a pitch meeting with Thorne 2 years ago, his face purple with rage. I had spent a week prepping Mark for that meeting, sacrificing my own Prometheus's development time to build Mark's pitch deck. Mark had failed. He had stormed into the kitchen and thrown his briefcase, nearly hitting me. "That guy Thorne is a joke," Mark had yelled. "He is an academic, not a killer. He is just like you. Lena, all numbers. No gut. He'll be broke in 5 years." Mark was mocking Thorne for having the exact qualities I respected: integrity, skepticism, and a ruthless focus on data. He was mocking Thorne for being the one man who was not susceptible to his sociopathic charm. Mark thinks gut is what matters. I will now give the man of all numbers the data to destroy him. I finalized the data packet. It was the exact simulation I had run while I had pneumonia. The one I had sacrificed my health to complete. The one he had looked at and said, "Thank God you caught this. We'll shelve it." He had called me his conscience, and then shelved me. I will now show him what happens when that conscience goes public. I drafted the emails. The subject line was the same for both. A note from Prometheus regarding Evandra FR22. I attached the liver toxicity simulation. I hit send. I waited. The market opened. The stock continued to soar on the media hype. Mark and Eva were probably in a board meeting. Accepting congratulations. If they even saw the anonymous Prometheus leak, they would dismiss it. They would assume it was a crank. They would assume it was a jealous, theoretical rival. They would expect to issue a simple denial and watch it disappear. They were wrong. At 9:45 a.m., Julian Thorne's terminal lit up. The man Mark called a number cruncher. I did not see theory. He saw the mathematical proof of a catastrophic, multi-billion-dollar lie. At 9:50 a.m., the editors at The Lancet saw the email. They did not see a crank. They recognized the Prometheus's data signature. It was the legendary, anonymous source. They recognized the math. It was irrefutable. At 10 a.m., The Lancet posted an emergency online letter to the editor. It did not make accusations. It simply posted the Prometheus's data and asked, in cold, academic language, why the company's public data did not match this simulation. At 10:01 a.m., Julian Thorne issued a flash sell notice to his high-tier clients. The notice was one sentence: irrefutable. Catastrophic third-party data on Evandra received. All Vance pharma positions are toxic. At 10:02 a.m., the automated trading bots picked up Thorne's note. The stock, which had been soaring at $112, halted. It reopened at 10:15 a.m. It opened at $67. It plummeted 40% in 1 hour. Mark and Eva were in their board meeting. I watched the live feed of the stock ticker on my hotel room television. They were blindsided. Their phones were exploding. Their media blitz, their wall of lies, had been vaporized by a single, anonymous data packet. They were not just fighting a rumor. They were fighting a ghost. They were fighting Prometheus. And they were enraged. Mark, I knew, was cornered. He would now be consumed with one thought: who is Prometheus? The stock crash was a 40% annihilation of his company's value. Mark was a cornered animal. And a cornered animal does not reason. It attacks. He scheduled an emergency interview on CNBC. A segment meant for damage control. I watched from the gray, impersonal quiet of my hotel suite. He looked sharp, but his eyes were frantic, darting back and forth. The anchor, smelling blood, pressed him hard about the Prometheus leak and the Lancet's emergency letter. Mark launched his counterattack. He did not address the data. He attacked the source. He called Prometheus a cowardly, anonymous saboteur. He called the leak unverified theoretical garbage and a disgusting act of corporate espionage. He said this was an attack on innovation, an attack on the patients who were waiting for Evandra. I remembered my first academic debate at MIT. I had been terrified. I spent an entire month, night and day, preparing my thesis defense. I remembered the thrill of the intellectual fight, the parry and thrust of data. I had won. My professor, Amani Dolist, I had told me I had one of the sharpest theoretical minds he had ever seen. I had lived for that world. I had sacrificed that entire arena. My life. For Mark, I had chosen to be his silent partner, his anonymous secret weapon. He was now on international television, his voice dripping with contempt, calling my mind theoretical garbage. He was using the very tactics I had taught him how to sound bold, how to attack the premise, how to control the room to attack me. His anonymous, cowardly self. He was using the confidence I had built in him to tear down the world I had sacrificed for him. He thinks theory is a weakness. I will show him it is the foundation of the reality that is about to crush him. The anchor pressed him again. But the data. Mark the Lancet took it seriously. Julian Thorne took it seriously. Mark's composure broke. He snapped. "Data can be faked," he yelled, his voice cracking. "This Prometheus is a fraud. A jealous, academic rival. He is hiding in the shadows because he knows his numbers are a lie." And then, in a spectacular display of narcissistic rage, he did it. He looked straight into the camera, his eyes burning with a zealot's fury. "I will be the keynote speaker at the Global Pharma Symposium next week," he announced. "I challenge this Prometheus, this keyboard warrior, to show his face. Debate me. Debate Dr. Eva Reed. If your data is so real, if you are not a coward, prove it in public." But he will not. I guarantee you, he will not show. I thought about the last Global Pharma Symposium, the one 3 years ago. It was my field, my old colleagues, my old professors. Everyone I had respected would be there. I had begged him to let me go with him. He had refused. He told me it was a bad look. He said having his housewife follow him around made him look weak, like he needed a babysitter. He told me to stay home and stick to the theory. I had stayed home. I had watched the live feed. Humiliated. I had sacrificed my professional dignity, my connections, my place in that world, just to protect his fragile, pathetic ego. He had banished me from that world to make himself look strong. Now, he was standing on a global stage, begging his cowardly anonymous enemy, who was me, to show up. He was publicly challenging the very person he had privately deemed too embarrassing and weak to even attend. He thinks he is challenging a rival. He is just inviting the housewife he banished. He finished the interview, flush with adrenaline. He thought he had won. He was convinced of it. He had set the perfect trap. He was absolutely certain Prometheus was a male academic competitor. He probably thought it was Dr. Eris Thorne from Johnson & Johnson, a man Mark had insulted at a previous conference. He knew Prometheus would never reveal his identity. To do so, in Mark's mind, would be to admit to corporate espionage. It would open Prometheus to a massive, company-ending lawsuit from Mark's legal team. He expected Prometheus to stay silent, to hide in the shadows, as he said. He would then go to the symposium. He would stand on that stage, wait for the silence, and then declare victory by default. He would mock the coward who refused to show. He would win the narrative. He would stabilize the stock. It was a brilliant, narcissistic checkmate. I thought of the Cadmus Group. I thought of the hundreds of thousands of dollars from my inheritance that I had sunk into that legal fortress. I had sacrificed my own rainy day fund, the money my grandmother had left me, to build it. Mark had always mocked my secretive nature with money, calling me cheap and paranoid. He was right. I was paranoid. He was challenging Prometheus to show his face, expecting Prometheus to fear a lawsuit. But Prometheus was not a rival. Prometheus was me, and Prometheus was not an individual. Prometheus was the Cadmus Group. Prometheus was an anonymous, untouchable, armored legal entity based in Switzerland. I did not fear his lawsuit. He should have feared mine. I watched his triumphant, smug face on the television. He thought he had just won the war. I calmly opened my laptop. I went to the website for the Global Pharma Symposium. I navigated to the registration page. He had set the stage. He had sent the invitation. He had prepared the spotlight for his own execution. All because he believed his useless, theoretical, cowardly wife was sitting on her parents' couch, crying. I typed in my name, Dr. Lena Vance. Registration confirmed. The auditorium at the Global Pharma Symposium was a cathedral of money and science. It was packed. Every major CEO, every regulator from the FDA, and every key analyst, including Julian Thorne in the front row, was in that room. It was the center of their universe. I stood in the back, by the main entrance, holding a small, unsecured microphone I had procured from a technician. Mark and Eva walked onto the main stage. They were the power couple. The visionaries. They were glowing from their media blitz. Accepting the applause, Mark stepped to the podium, his face a mask of confident, visionary leadership. I thought of the last symposium, the one 3 years ago. I had begged him to let me come. I had sacrificed my own professional connections, my place in this very community, just to appease his fragile ego. He had banished me, his housewife babysitter, telling me to stick to the theory at home. I had watched this exact event on a grainy laptop feed, feeling humiliated and invisible. He was now standing on the very stage he had forbidden me from approaching, using the success my useless theory had provided, all to celebrate my replacement. He wanted me to be invisible. He has no idea that my theory is about to become the only thing visible in this entire room. Mark finished his glowing presentation on Evandra. He paused, his expression shifting to one of righteous, patronizing concern. He looked around the massive room. "And now," he announced, his voice booming, "we come to the elephant in the room, our Prometheus." The hall went utterly silent. The investors, the ones who had lost 40% of their value from the leak, held their breath. I issued a public challenge, Mark declared, his voice full of theatrical power. I challenge this coward to show his face. I challenge this saboteur to debate me and the brilliant Dr. Eva Reed. He scanned the crowd again, a smug, knowing smile on his face. As I expected. He is not here. He is hiding. Because his theoretical garbage cannot stand up to applied genius. He called me a coward. I remembered when he was the coward. I remembered him vomiting in the men's room before his first big venture capital pitch. Completely paralyzed by fear. I had coached him. I had written his cue cards. I had sacrificed my own time, my own dissertation work, to build his confidence. I had told him, "You are a lion. Mark, I am just the strategist. You are the star." He was now using the very lion persona I had invented for him to stand on this stage and call me a coward. For the very anonymity I had chosen to protect his ego. He thinks he is a lion. He is just a parrot. And I am about to take away his script. Mark and Eva smirked at each other. They had won. The crowd began to murmur. Accepting that Prometheus had conceded, the narrative was reset. The stock would recover. Mark turned back to his presentation, ready to move on. A voice cut through the auditorium. It was clear, calm, and amplified by the microphone I was holding. I accept the challenge. Every single head in the room, thousands of them swiveled to the back. The live feed cameras panned, catching me in their spotlight. I began to walk down the central aisle. I was not wearing a gala gown. I was wearing a simple, severe black dress. I was not a wife. I was an analyst. Mark froze. He squinted into the lights. His face, so full of triumph, crumpled into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He could not process what he was seeing. "Lena," he hissed into his podium microphone, his voice suddenly small and thin. "What are you doing? Get off the common. Get out of here. You are embarrassing yourself." He called me embarrassing. I remembered all the years I had spent sacrificing my own identity, just to prevent his embarrassment. I remembered dumbing myself down at dinner parties, pretending I did not understand the science so he could explain it to me. I had endured the pitying looks from my old colleagues, all to protect him. He was now publicly humiliating me for being an embarrassment, while the only reason he had a reputation left to protect was because I had spent 15 years sacrificing my own to build it. He is worried about the wrong thing. He should be worried about the data. I reached the stage. I did not look at him. I did not look at Eva, who was staring at me as if I were a ghost. I walked directly to the main podium, unplugged his laptop, and plugged in my own. The massive projector screen behind him flickered. and then lit up with the Proteus interface. I turned to the audience. My voice was steady. Mr. Vance challenged Prometheus to show his face. I announced, my voice ringing with absolute authority. He just did not expect her. Mark recoiled as if he had been physically struck. Eva let out a small, strangled gasp. I turned my gaze to my husband. You challenged my data. I said, my voice cutting. You called it theoretical garbage. You called it a lie. I remembered the real lie. I remembered running the first Proteus's simulation on FR-22 while I had pneumonia, sacrificing my own health to get him the warning. He had looked at my 98% toxicity report and said, thank God you caught this. Lena, we'll shelve it. He had taken my truthful data and called it a lie in public. All while he was using his lie that the drug was safe to commit fraud. He called my warning garbage. I will now show the world the entire trash heap. This is not a lie, I stated. I clicked the mouse. The projector screen flashed to life. This was not a presentation. This was the full, catastrophic, final Proteus's simulation. You all saw the liver toxicity leak. I announced to the silent, horrified room, but Prometheus's held this back. For this moment, I clicked again. A new simulation ran in real time. Here, I said, as a new graph spiked into a horrifying shade of red, is the catastrophic neurological damage Evandra causes. I clicked again, and here is the 12% incidence of fatal heart arrhythmia. It was not theory. It was a visual, irrefutable, mathematical execution. The data was flawless. The science was perfect. A woman in the front row screamed. In the third row, Julian Thorne, the analyst, simply stood up and began to walk out, already on his phone. The room exploded. Eva Reed, standing next to Mark, swayed. Her eyes rolled back into her head. She fainted, collapsing in a heap on the stage. Mark was frozen, his face ashen gray, his mouth open. He was a statue of his own ruin. I was not finished. I looked at the investors, the ones who were now clawing at their phones, screaming at their brokers. Sell it all, get me out. I leaned back into the microphone, my voice cutting through the sheer panic. He did not just lie, I stated, my voice devoid of all emotion. He knew. He took my original toxicity warning, and he intentionally tried to sell you poison. The room erupted. Security rushed the stage. Not for me, but to protect Mark from the investors who were surging forward, screaming for his blood. My work here was done. The humiliation at the symposium was absolute. Mark was not just a ruined CEO. He was a global pariah. The SEC investigation was immediate. His assets were frozen. The stock was delisted. I watched the fallout from my hotel room. He was fighting for his life. His attack, when it came, was not subtle. It was desperate. It was a classic Darvo, Denu, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The headline appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Leaked from his new, high-priced crisis management team, Vance Farmaceo accuses Prometheus' wife of fraud. The article was a masterpiece of narcissistic fiction. It painted me, Lena Vance, as the villain. I was an unstable, vindictive ex-wife. I was bitter about the divorce. I was jealous of Dr. Eva Reed's superior talent. I remembered all the years I had sacrificed my own reputation, my name, to protect his fragile ego. I had chosen anonymity, sitting in the audience while he took the applause for my breakthroughs. I had endured the pitying looks from my old colleagues at MIT, the ones who thought I had wasted a brilliant mind to become a housewife. I had sacrificed my entire professional dignity to make him feel strong. He was now using the very anonymity I had chosen as proof that I was a nobody. He was twisting my sacrifice into a weapon. He claimed I was a vindictive, nobody who had lashed out after being discarded. He was painting my revelation of the truth as a pathetic, emotional outburst from a woman scorned. He thinks the truth is just a matter of public opinion. I will prove to him that it is a mathematical constant. The article's second attack was on my work. His lawyers issued a statement. They claimed I was the one who had stolen his foundational research. They claimed the Prometheus's algorithm was a flawed, theoretical model that I had fabricated to falsify toxicity data. Theoretical garbage. He was still using that phrase. I thought of the decade of my life I had poured into Prometheus. I thought of the sleepless nights, the postponed doctor's appointments, the grinding, thankless, unpaid labor of building the most complex protein-folding simulation in the world. I remembered the breakthrough at 3 a.m, my back aching, my eyes burning, when I finally solved the Valenti paradox. He had mocked that work, still playing with your toy numbers. Lena, when are you going to join the real world? He was now, in a public legal filing, claiming my theoretical garbage was actually his foundational IP. He was simultaneously arguing that my work was useless when he wanted to humiliate me, and that my work was his foundational property now that it was valuable. He was trying to steal the very asset he had spent a decade insulting. He wants to claim ownership of my work. Fine, I will show him, and the entire world, what that work actually is. The final accusation was the motive. The article claimed my sole purpose was to steal the company in a vindictive divorce. I thought of the check, the insulting $5,000 severance. I had accepted it. I had walked away from the house I had secured. I had walked away from the marital assets my anonymous work and my secret inheritance had funded. I had signed his no-contest divorce. I had sacrificed all financial claims, just to get my freedom and expose his crime. He was now publicly accusing me of trying to steal the company for money, when I had willingly accepted his nothing payout. The man pathologically obsessed with wealth and status, could not comprehend a motive other than money. He could not understand that this was about ethics. This was about the science. This was about the lives he was willing to trade for his stock price. He was projecting his own sociopathic greed onto me. He expected this to work. He expected this to muddy the waters. He wanted the world to see a messy, he said. She said, divorce. Not a corporate crime. He expected to cast just enough doubt on the Prometheus's data to buy himself time. He expected me to hire a lawyer, to issue a denial, to fight him in the press. I did not. I watched the slanderous news report finish. I saw my face, the vindictive wife, splashed across the screen. I calmly turned off the television. I did not call the Wall Street Journal. I did not call a PR firm. I picked up my burner phone and called my Cadmus lawyers in Switzerland. The next morning, the financial world received a second shock. The anemic, panicked denials from Mark's team were instantly rendered obsolete. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the boards of Mark's top 3 competitors, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Novartis all received a formal, encrypted invitation. The invitation was not from Dr. Lena Vance, the vindictive wife. It was from Proteus Dynamics, the new name of my Swiss holding company, and it was signed by Prometheus. It was an invitation to a live, transparent, fully catered, third-party audit of the Prometheus's algorithm. I was not telling them the data was real. I was inviting the entire industry and the federal government to come and validate it for themselves. I was giving my competitors the keys to the kingdom, just to prove that my science was flawless. Mark's fake data claim was not just neutralized, it was rendered utterly absurd. He was now facing his ultimate nightmare. He had not muddied the waters. He had invited a tidal wave of transparency. He now had to watch as the real geniuses of his industry, the people he desperately wanted to impress, gathered to pick apart his lie. Live in front of the regulators. He had to stop this audit. The audit was held in a secure, neutral boardroom at the downtown Four Seasons. Organized and paid for by the Cadmus Group, the room was tense. The air crackled with high stakes. Intellectual warfare. On one side sat the regulators, 2 senior directors from the FDA and a lead investigator from the SEC. On the other side sat the competition, the chief data scientists from Pfizer, Novartis, and Johnson & Johnson. They were not there as friends. They were there as predators, invited to witness a kill. And at the head of the table sat Dr. Eris Thorne. I had personally selected Dr. Willie Thorne from Johnson & Johnson to be the lead independent auditor. I had sacrificed a great deal to get him there, to get J&J to agree. My Prometheus identity had to grant them 6 months of limited, free access to the Proteus's oncology simulation. I had sacrificed an immediate, multi-million-dollar licensing fee just to secure him. I remembered Mark's utter contempt for Thorne. He had met him once at a benefit. Mark had returned, furious, mimicking Thorne's precise, academic way of speaking. He called Thorne a pencil pusher, a bureaucratic nobody, and an academic who could not handle the private sector. He mocked Thorne for being all theory, no gut, the exact insult he had always used on me. Mark had dismissed Thorne as a non-threat. Now, I was sacrificing millions of dollars just to place the fate of Mark's entire company in the hands of the one man Mark was too arrogant to respect. He was the one man whose integrity was beyond Mark's comprehension. Mark thinks Thorne is a nobody. He was about to learn that a nobody with integrity is the most dangerous enemy a fraudster can have. Mark was not in the room. His lawyers had advised him against it. But I knew he was watching. The Cadmus Group had arranged a secure IS-11. One-way video feed. Just for him. He was watching. Trapped. Forced to witness his fate. He was watching. Desperate for his vindictive wife narrative to be proven. He was praying for a flaw. I, as the representative of Prometheus Dynamics, stood up. I did not speak. I simply pushed a new Reblos sealed hard drive to the center of the table. It contained the full source code for Proteuses and all the raw data for Evandra. Dr. Thorne's team began the audit. They loaded the code. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the clicking of keyboards as the greatest minds in the industry, my competitors. My peers began to pick apart my life's work. I watched their faces. They were skeptical at first. Then, their skepticism melted. It was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. Then, by sheer, unadulterated awe. I remembered the decade of my life I had sacrificed for this. I remembered the nights I had spent coding the cardiac arrhythmia module, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and the belief that this mattered. I remembered the agony of the Valenti paradox, the problem Eva had claimed she fixed. I had sacrificed my career for this theoretical garbage. I had given up my name, my reputation, my tenure. I had accepted the title of housewife so Mark could feel strong. He had stood on a stage and said, "Some people are just meant for theory." Now, the chief scientists of Pfizer and Novartis were staring at my theoretical garbage. They were not laughing. They were not mocking. They were looking at the screen as if it were the Holy Grail. They were not looking at a hobby. They were looking at the most valuable and most powerful piece of intellectual property in modern medicine. They were looking at the truth. Mark was watching their faces. He was watching his fabricated data lie, his vindictive wife narrative, evaporate in real time. Dr. Thorne's team finished the code review. It was flawless. Now, Dr. Thorne said, his voice cutting through the silence, "We run the compound." They ran Evandra. They ran the fixed data that Mark and Eva had stolen. The data they had submitted to the FDA. Through the real Proteus's algorithm. The simulation was fast. The result flashed on the main screen in large Propetic. Red. Irrefutable letters. 100% Catastrophic, cascade failure. The room was silent. The SEC investigator wrote one word on his legal pad and underlined it, criminal. Dr. Eris Thorne. The pencil pusher. The bureaucrat. The nobody. Stood up. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the regulators. He looked at his competitors. Then, he looked at me. The Prometheus's algorithm, he announced, his voice ringing with absolute accident. Academic certainty is not flawed. It is not fabricated. It is a generational achievement. It is perfect. He did not call me a genius. He called my work perfect. It was the highest compliment I had ever received. The data submitted by Vance Pharma, Thorne continued, was not just optimistic. It was a categorical, verifiable falsehood. Evandra is not a cure. It is poison. The FDA director stood up and left the room. Already on her phone. My useless theory had just been validated by the entire industry. It was not garbage. It was the new gold standard. I had not just won. I had proven that Mark's entire applied science empire was nothing but reckless. Sociopathic gambling. I knew Mark was watching. I knew he had just seen the awe on his competitors' faces. He had just heard the man he called a nobody validate my genius and condemn him as a fraud. He had just watched the FDA walk out. He was done. His company was gone. His freedom was gone. He was cornered. He was ruined. And he had one last disperate, pathetic move left. He was about to do something truly insane. Mark was watching the feed. He was watching the validation. He was watching the SEC investigator make his notes. He was watching the FDA director walk out. Her phone pressed to her ear. His vindictive wife narrative was dead. His faked data accusation was dead. He was exposed. Ruined. And about to be indicted. The audit recessed for 15 minutes. The room emptied. The competitors and regulators filtering out. Their faces grim. They were already calculating the fallout. I remained seated. Dr. Eris Thorne, the man Mark called a pencil pusher, also remained seated. The SEC investigator, a man named Miles, stayed with us. I had sacrificed millions of dollars in licensing fees just to get Eris Thorne in that chair. I had gambled my own financial leverage. The Prometheus's oncology module, to secure the one man whose integrity was as absolute as my algorithm. I had sacrificed a fortune to weaponize the very quality Mark had mocked as useless and academic. Mark had always scoffed at Thorne. He is just like you. Lena. Mark had sneered after Thorne had questioned his financials at a benefit. All numbers. No goot. He is a nobody. Mark was now watching the nobody who held his entire fate in his hands. He was watching the theorist who had just been validated by the entire industry. He, the man of gut, was a cornered, desperate animal, and he did the one thing a desperate animal does. Dr. Thorne's personal cell phone, sitting on the polished mahogany table, began to buzz. The caller ID was unknown. Dr. Thorne looked at the phone. He looked at the SEC investigator. Then he looked at me. His expression was cold, clinical, and precise. He pressed the accept button. And then he pressed the speaker button. Mark's voice filled the silent, empty boardroom. It was not the voice of the visionary CEO. It was the wheezing, frantic gasp of a drowning man. Aris, Aris. Thank God. Listen to me. You have to listen. Dr. Thorne did not move. Eris. She is lying. Mark screamed into the phone. She is a sick, vindictive woman. She faked the data. She is trying to destroy me. I thought of all the years I had spent using my faked data, my useless theory to save him. I remembered the AG44 compound. The one my simulation had flagged for renal failure, saving him from a catastrophic trial. I had sacrificed my own career, my name, to be his anonymous conscience. He was now using the exact gaslighting he had used on me to try and corrupt the one man I had chosen to be the arbiter of the truth. He thinks vindictive is the only motive for the truth. You know what these academics are like. Eris Mark pleaded. You are one of them, but we are the real scientists. We are the ones who get things done. He was trying to bond with Thorne over the very academic insult he had used to destroy my life. He was trying to separate the theorists me from the doers them. He did not realize he was talking to a mirror. He was trying to bribe the one man who shared my flawed worldview that the data is all that matters. $10 million. Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. Right now. An offshore account in Zurich. I can have it there in an hour. The SEC investigator, Miles, slowly raised his eyebrows. He did not move. All you have to do, Mark begged, is find a flaw. Just one. Cast one doubt on the code. Say it is inconclusive. Say it needs further review. That is all I need. 10 million for one word. Eris. Mark expected him to take it. He genuinely believed it. Mark, who had lived his entire life by the code of gut and greed, could not comprehend that a man like Thorne existed. He, who had dismissed Thorne as an underpaid academic, now believed that underpaid meant for sale. I thought of the $5,000 severance check he had sent me. He thought I was underpaid. He thought I was worthless. He had sacrificed my financial security, or so he thought without a second thought. He was now using that same financial contempt on the man who held his freedom. He thinks everyone's integrity is as cheap as his own. The room was silent. Mark was breathing heavily on the line, waiting for the yes. Doctor. Eris Thorne leaned calmly toward the phone. He did not look rattled. He did not look tempted. He looked, as always, academic. I am sorry, Mr. Vance, Thorne said, his voice perfectly level. The precise, clipped tone Mark had always hated. The connection is poor. Did you say $10 million? Yes, yes. Mark's voice was ecstatic. He was victorious. He thought Thorne had taken the bait. 10 million. The Zurich account number is... Doctor, Thorne interrupted, his voice like ice. That will not be necessary. I just wanted to ensure the recorder picked up the amount clearly. The silence on the line was no longer the silence of suspense. It was the silence of the void. Thorne continued. You are, of course, aware that you are on speakerphone, and that this call is being witnessed by a senior investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission. A sound came through the phone. It was not a word. It was an animal sound. A gasp. A choke. A terrible, wet sound of a man's entire world collapsing in his lungs. The SEC investigator, Miles, leaned forward. He spoke directly into the phone. Mr. Mark Vance, this is Investigator Miles. Your attempt to bribe a federal regulator during an active investigation has been recorded. We are dispatching a unit to your location now. Do not move. The call ended. It was over. Mark was no longer just a corporate fraud. He was a felon. He was caught. I knew we were not the only ones who had access to a live feed of the audit. I knew his star scientist, his partner in crime, his brilliant applied genius. Dr. Eva Reed was watching from her own panic room. She had just watched the Prometheus's validation. She had just heard Mark, her lover and partner, commit a disparity, pathetic, and jailable felony. She was now trapped. She was tied to a criminal. She was tied to a fraud. She had one move left. She had to cut him loose to save herself. The audit room was still, the air thick with the phantom echo of Mark's confession. Dr. Thorne and the SEC investigator, Miles, were collecting their notes. The bribe attempt had not just been a failure, it was a felony. Witnessed, and recorded. Mark was finished. We all knew Eva Reed was watching the same feed. We all knew she had just watched her lover, her partner in fraud, drive his own career off a cliff. The main boardroom door burst open. It was Eva. She was not the same smug, confident genius from the symposium. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a frantic, intelligent terror. She was flanked by a man I did not recognize. A man who radiated the cold, expensive confidence of a high-priced criminal defense attorney. She was not here to save Mark. She was here to save herself. This was the accomplice's betrayal. I remembered how I had mentored her. I had taken her under my wing, believing in the duty of women in STEM to support one another. I had sacrificed my own valuable research time I could have spent on Prometheus, to review her sloppy papers and secure her adjunct grant. I had believed in her. She had called me her hero then. She had called me her inspiration. She was now using the very career I had helped her build as a shield, attempting to paint herself as a victimized woman. She was stealing my narrative just as she had stolen my husband and my work. She thinks she can play the victim. I am the only one in this room who knows she is a predator. Her new lawyer stepped forward, addressing the SEC investigator directly. "Investigator Miles," the lawyer said, his voice smooth. "My client, Dr. Eva Reed, is here voluntarily. She has been the victim of sustained, coercive behavior from Mr. Vance. She is prepared to offer full, corroborating testimony against him regarding the Evandra fraud." He paused for dramatic effect. "In exchange, of course, for full transactional immunity." Eva looked at me. She was not apologetic. She was triumphant. She was smirking. She genuinely believed this was a victory. She expected me, the vindictive ex-wife, to be thrilled. She thought I would applaud her, that I would be grateful for her help in sending Mark to prison. She thought we were now allies. Two women scorned, united against the bad man. I did not applaud. I did not move. I simply met her gaze, my expression utterly cold. I spoke, my voice cutting through her lawyer's confidence. "That will not be necessary. Dr. Reed." Eva's smirk faltered. Her lawyer turned, irritated by the interruption. I stood up. I addressed Investigator Miles. But I never took my eyes off Eva. "Dr. Reed's story is a lie," I stated. "She was not coerced. She was a willing, arrogant, and active participant from the very beginning." I remembered the dinner party. I remembered the humiliation of serving my own replacement. I remembered the honeypot notebooks I had left on my desk. The notebooks filled with the ghosts of my failures, the dead-end equations I had sacrificed years of my life to disprove. I remembered her patronizing voice. "Oh, darling, you just didn't know how to apply it." She was now claiming Mark forced her. She was claiming she was a victim. But she was the one who had walked into my office. She was the one who had mocked my work. She was the one who, in her supreme arrogance, I believed she was fixing my flawed theory. She was not coerced. She was the catalyst. She thinks she can rewrite history. I kept the receipts. I turned to my own lawyer, the silent representative from the Cadmus group. "The file, please." He handed me an iPad. I did not give it to the investigator. I walked directly over to Eva. I held the screen inches from her face. So only she, her lawyer, and Investigator Miles could see it. "You seem to have forgotten the dinner party." "Doctor," I said. On the screen, time-stamped security footage from my home office played. It showed Eva, alone. It showed her taking out her phone. It showed her meticulously, page by page, photographing the flawed decoy notebooks. Eva's face, so composed, so victimized, completely collapsed. Her lawyer recoiled, his jaw dropping. You were not coerced, I said, my voice low and devoid of all emotion. You were an accessory before the fact. You were the one who brought the stolen data to Mark. You were the one who claimed you could fix my flawed work. You were not a victim. Eva, you were just a mediocre thief. Too arrogant to realize you were stealing poison. I had endured the humiliation of that dinner party. Serving the woman who was sleeping with my husband. I had sacrificed my own dignity to set that trap. I had waited months for this moment. She was now claiming she was a victim of Mark's coercion. But the evidence proved she was the one who had initiated the IP theft. She wanted immunity. I will ensure she gets accountability. Investigator Miles looked at Eva's lawyer. His voice was like stone. Immunity. Your client just perjured herself in front of a federal investigator. Your client is not a witness. She is a co-conspirator. Eva was trapped. She looked from Miles to me. Her face, which had been so full of smug triumph, was now a mask of pure, primal hatred. She had sacrificed her integrity, her career, and her lover, all to save herself. And she had failed. Her calculated betrayal of Mark had resulted only in her own immediate legal jeopardy. She had not secured a plea deal. She had just, in front of everyone, confessed to a crime. While I provided the evidence that disproved her only defense, both of them, Mark and Eva, totally isolated, utterly destroyed, both were now facing prison, trapped by their own arrogance, and annihilated by the useless theory they had despised. The aftermath was not a negotiation. It was a liquidation. Mark and Eva were led away in handcuffs. The video of Eva's confession, immediately followed by the audio of Mark's attempted bribe, created a legal vortex from which they could not escape. The Evandra scandal was not just a failure, it was the final prina. Catastrophic payload that vaporized Vance Pharma. The stock, already delisted, was now worthless paper. The board was fired. The SEC investigation expanded into a criminal probe. The company, the one Mark had built on my sacrifices, was bankrupt. I remembered writing the first business plan for this company. I remembered sitting on the floor of our tiny apartment, sketching out the VC pitch on a legal pad. I had sacrificed my own academic career, my name, my entire future, to be his secret weapon. He had called me his genius partner then. He had begged me to join him, claiming we would be unstoppable. He was right. I was unstoppable. He was just in the way. He had taken the vision I had provided and twisted it into a criminal enterprise. He had used the company I had sacrificed my name for to build a pedestal for his mistress. He thinks he is a genius partner. He is just a criminal. And his partnership has been terminated. The news was dominated by the collapse. Pundits debated what would happen to the assets. The consensus was total liquidation. The labs would be sold for scrap. The patents would be scattered. Thousands of employees, the ethical ones and the complicit ones, would be jobless. Mark and Eva, in their shared arrogance, had not just destroyed themselves, they had destroyed the livelihoods of thousands. I thought of the other scientists, the pencil pushers, the theory department Mark had sidelined, the ones he had mocked, the ones I had quietly mentored. I had sacrificed my own political capital with Mark, time and time again. To protect their useless research budgets, he had called them a drain, a waste of money. Just like me, he had prioritized the applied genius of Eva Reed. The fraud. He was now in a holding cell. Eva was out on bail. Her passport surrendered, and the useless scientists I had protected were the only remaining, untainted asset in the entire corporation. He saw them as a cost. I saw them as the cure. The bankruptcy court moved fast. They needed to stop the bleeding. They needed a buyer for the toxic assets. There was only one bidder. My Swiss holding company, the Cadmus Group, operating under its new public-facing name, Prometheus Dynamics, made a formal offer. It was not a high offer. It was an insult. I offered to buy the entire collapsed infrastructure, the labs, the offices, the patents, and the debt for $1. The court accepted. They had no choice. I was the only bidder who understood that the assets were not the problem. The leadership was... The final inversion was complete. Mark was in a processing center, being moved from a holding cell. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He saw the television in the corner of the room, tuned to the financial news. Eva was in her lawyer's office, an ankle monitor strapped to her leg. She, too, was watching the same broadcast. The anchor was standing in front of the familiar Vance Pharma headquarters, but the logo, the one Mark had been so proud of, was being taken down. I remembered how he had forced me to drop my Vance name professionally. He said it was confusing to his brand. I had sacrificed my identity to support his brand. He was now watching that brand being dismantled. His name forever associated with fraud and a felony. He wanted one strong brand. He has one. He is the brand of failure. A new logo was being raised on the building. It was sleek, minimalist, and intelligent. It read, Prometheus Dynamics. The anchor turned to the camera. In a stunning conclusion to the Vance Pharma collapse, she announced, the company's assets have been acquired in full by Prometheus Dynamics, a private Swiss holding company revealed to be owned by the mysterious Prometheuses. The camera cut to a live press conference. I was standing at the podium. I was not the embarrassing housewife. I was not the vindictive wife. I was the new CEO. Mark's face, on the grainy television, went white. He recoiled, stumbling backward onto the concrete bench. Eva let out a sound, a high-pitched, animal wail of pure, unadulterated hatred. I remembered the insulting $5,000 severance check. He had deemed me worthless. He had sacrificed nothing. While I had sacrificed everything, my career, my health, my anonymity, my inheritance, he had told me, you contributed nothing. You will get nothing. He was right. I did not get nothing. I got everything. His nothing severance was the final insult that had freed me. He was now sitting in a cell, truly owning nothing. He had thrown away a multi-billion-dollar empire. All because he was too arrogant, too blind, to see the value in the useless theorist standing right next to him. I leaned into the microphone. Prometheus Dynamics is not a salvage operation, I stated, my voice ringing across the globe. It is a restoration. My first act as CEO is to terminate the Evandra project permanently. My second act is to fully fund and rehire the theoretical science division. The brilliant, ethical scientists this company had wrongly dismissed. Mark lowered his head. Eva was openly weeping. They were not just watching me take their company. They were watching me erase them. They were watching me rebuild the company on the foundation of the very principles they had mocked, and with the very people they had thrown away. I had not just won. I had proven that my useless theory was the only thing that was ever real.